All right, we are going to have our first screencast notes on our Unit 1 Historical Thinking. Now, we're going to start by looking at our expectations for learning. And this expectation for learning is actually going to be something that we focus on throughout the entire year, and we'll see it in a number of our units, but it goes well with our first unit. So students will be able to describe historical events and issues from the perspective of people living at the time, avoiding evaluating the past in terms of today's norms and values. So basically what that means is throughout the year, we are going to try and look at history from the people who had lived through it. And we need to try and avoid looking at the past in comparison to today, because we're going to see that today's norms, today's day-to-day practices and values, what we hold important, might be very different from what they've done in the past. A second expectation for learning is that we are going to demonstrate how understanding individual and group perspectives is essential to analyzing historic and contemporary issues. So we need to look at how different people's point of views are going to be important in looking at the past. So we have a number of I can statements that hopefully by the time we finish this unit, you will be able to do. So things like describe historical events and issues from the perspective of people living in the past, avoiding today's norms and values. You should hopefully be able to explain why multiple sources and perspectives are needed to build a historical narrative, explain how history is interpreted, the difference between primary and secondary sources, evaluate a historian or archaeologist's interpretation of an event or an issue. So hopefully we'll see these pop up throughout the unit. Now, what is historical thinking? As you guys pull up your notes, what you glued into your notebook, you're going to see that what we highlighted in this presentation is going to go into the empty boxes in your notes. If at any time you need to pause this presentation so that you can write down what is highlighted and add it to your boxes, you can do that. Remember, you can also replay in case you have any questions. So historical thinking is the reading, analysis, and writing that is necessary to tell stories of the past. It's not only what we know about the past, but how we know it. So thinking historically helps us get closer to the past to retrieve and construct a more accurate picture of what happened and what it meant. So thinking like a historian, we need to look at a number of different questions as to how they do it. So we can kind of see, thinking like a historian, they're going to look at cause and effect. What were the causes of the past events? What were the outcome or the effects? Change in continuity. What has changed? What has remained the same? Turning points. How did past decisions or actions affect future decisions? Through their eyes, how did people in the past view the world? And using the past, how does the past help us make sense of the present? We will do a lot of that. While we look at the past, avoiding today's norms and values, we will look at how the past shows up in our world today, how it influences us on a daily basis. All right, so multiple accounts and perspectives. So many people think of history as a single account, but in fact, we actually use multiple sources to get an accurate picture, as accurate a picture as possible of events in the past. So when you're reading a book about history, it seems like you're reading one account, but really it's a mix of many different sources, different articles, different people, different pictures that come together to tell the story. So whether we use textbooks, original documents, photos, drawings, or film, teaching for historical thinking demands that you work with lots of different types of sources, and you learn to analyze and synthesize them. So you're not just looking at them for face value, but you need to break them down and figure out, what is this source really showing us? No single account written from one perspective captures the complexity of the past. So if you think about hearing a story of something that maybe happened in the cafeteria, If you hear one person's story, is that the full story of what happened? No. You might need to ask a number of people because, people that maybe saw it from one part of the room compared to the other have a different view of what really happened. All right, the analysis of primary sources. A primary source is an original document or object that was created at the time in the past, and they are important to reconstructing or figuring out the past. So they're an item from the past. Historical thinking includes learning how to read, question, contextualize, and analyze these sources as they can tell different stories about the same event. Again, so a primary source is a good source because it's from the past, but you still have to look at it with questions. What is this primary source telling us? Some examples of primary sources would be letters, government documents like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, diaries, speeches, photographs because they were taken at the time, art objects or things created during that time period, stamps, coins, and even clothing are great examples of primary sources. We do need to question primary sources though. We have to ask questions about what the eyewitness had to lose or gain with their accounts. Again, think about, say, something happened at school. The story you go home and tell your parents might be a little different than when the teacher calls home because of the outcome. You're trying to get out of trouble. The teacher's trying to tell what they had seen happen. So what interests are at stake? Why did they write down or draw this information? What does it mean to them? So when you're questioning primary sources, it's important to look for agreements and disagreements between two different accounts because you might run into two different stories about the same historical event. To be useful in understanding the past, primary sources need to be questioned and read closely. You cannot always take primary sources exactly for what they're worth. You need to ask questions. Now, a secondary source, though, is a little different. A secondary source is created by people sometime after the event happened using primary sources. So, for example, a textbook uses a number of different primary sources put together to tell you this history of the past, and it's created way after the event happened using primary sources. Okay? So it is written by someone who was not there at the time. Understanding historical context. Context is at the center of historical reasoning. Historians resist initial judgment and instead realize that they must ask questions, and to get as accurate a picture as possible, they have to make connections. Think about context clues, like when you're reading a story. You look at the words all around it in order to figure out what it means. So the context includes many different factors, from the beliefs of the day to the terminology that used to be used. Now your claim evidence connection. To be called history, stories must be supported by evidence. That would be true facts. History isn't fiction. It's not fake. We can't change the story to create a more interesting plot. As much fun as it would be to have a cat president, that is not true. It has not happened. And so we can't say history that we've had a cat president. By finding evidence, though, we're able to figure out the real accounts of events from the made-up stuff.